In the polished world of Hollywood, Ron Howard is the ultimate nice guy. We know him as the polite kid from Mayberry and the steady, reliable director behind some of cinema's most beloved films. But staying at the top for 60 years requires more than just kindness. It requires a thick skin and a willingness to navigate the sharp edges of the industry. Behind his famous smile lies a history of difficult sets and clashing egos. Howard didn't just witness greatness, he survived it. These are the 6 actors who challenged his patience and showed him the industry's sharpest edges. To the millions of Americans who tuned in to the Andy Griffith Show during the 60s, Frances Bavier was the personification of domestic warmth. As Aunt Bee, she was the stabilizing force of Mayberry, a woman whose biggest concerns were the quality of her pickles and the safety of her nephew, Opie. But for the young Ron Howard, the reality of working with Bavier was his first masterclass in the jarring disconnect between a public persona and a private reality. While the world saw a doting aunt, the cast and crew saw a classically trained New York stage actress who lived in a state of perpetual, icy professional disdain. Bavier did not see herself as part of an ensemble of good old boys in a rural comedy. She saw herself as a serious dramatic artist trapped in a medium she considered beneath her. This created a unique kind of friction on set, a quiet coldness that a child actor like Howard was uniquely sensitive to. In a town like Mayberry, which was built on the foundation of communal love, Bavier was an island of professional austerity. She didn't want to be Aunt Bee once the cameras stopped rolling. She wanted to be respected, and she felt that a sitcom about a small-town sheriff was an insult to her pedigree. Howard has recounted that Bavier was not a fan of the hijinks that Andy Griffith and Don Knotts engaged in, and while the men were laughing and ad-libbing, she remained rigid. Reportedly, Andy Griffith and Bavier did not get along during the series, and when Bavier was terminally ill in 1989, she contacted Griffith to say that she regretted they did not get along better. For Howard, Bavier represented a valuable lesson. The performance of chemistry is often an act of sheer will rather than a reflection of genuine affection. He learned that the character is a lie, and that you could create a masterpiece of warmth while standing in a room full of ice. If Frances Bavier represented the cold, internal resentment of a fading era, Yul Brynner was the opposite, a blazing, external sun that demanded every planet in the room orbit around him. Ron Howard encountered Brynner on the set of the 1959 film The Journey. Howard was only 5 years old, and it was his first credited acting role. He was a tiny red-headed boy thrust into the presence of a man who didn't just play kings, he believed he was one. Brynner, famous for his shaved head and his booming, authoritative voice in The King and I, carried an aura of absolute power that made no concessions for the presence of a child. This was Howard's first encounter with the divine right of kings, an archetype of the golden age where the star was not just a lead actor, but a sovereign ruler of the set. Brynner's evil, if one could call it that, was a form of psychological intimidation. He moved through the production with a rigid, terrifying grace. For a child like Howard, who was used to the gentle, paternal guidance of his own father, Brynner was an alien force. Howard recalls being genuinely frightened by Brynner's intensity. The actor had a way of looking through people rather than at them, a technique designed to maintain his status as the most important person in any room. This was a lesson in the atmosphere of fear. Howard watched as adult crew members scrambled to appease Brynner's every whim. Brynner's disapproval wasn't a conversation, it was a climate shift. For Howard, this was a formative experience in understanding how a single ego can hijack a collective creative process. It was the antithesis of the collaborative spirit Howard would later champion as a director. Decades later, when Howard transitioned into directing, the ghost of Yul Brynner likely sat on his shoulder as a reminder of what not to do. Howard's sets are famously relaxed and egalitarian, a direct reaction to the emperor model he witnessed in his youth. Where Yul Brynner's dominance was a relic of a vanishing empire, Shelley Long represented a modern, more cerebral kind of friction. By 1982, Ron Howard was at a crossroads. He was no longer the child actor under the thumb of icons. He was a young director trying to prove he had the authority to lead a major feature film. The project was Night Shift, a comedy that required a delicate balance of zany energy and grounded heart. In Shelley Long, Howard found a brilliant comedienne, but he also encountered an actress whose process was so meticulous and questioning that it threatened to grind the production to a halt. Long came from the rigorous world of Chicago's Second City, a background that emphasized intellectual deconstruction and character motivation. While Michael Keaton was improvising at a mile a minute, Long was often the brakes on the set. She didn't just want to say the lines. She wanted to know the molecular structure of why her character would choose those specific words. For Howard, this was a baptism into the world of star management. He wasn't just directing a movie. He was negotiating a daily peace treaty between the schedule and a star's obsessive perfectionism. The friction with Long wasn't born of malice, but of a mismatch in tempo. Howard, having grown up in the high-efficiency world of sitcoms where time is money, valued momentum. Long, conversely, seemed to view the set as a laboratory. Howard had to learn a vital lesson in directorial psychology. The analytical anchor isn't trying to be evil. They are trying to be safe. For Long, the scrutiny of every detail was a shield against failure. But for a director, that shield can become a wall. Howard found himself in a position where he had to validate her concerns without letting them sabotage the film's energy. This experience was a turning point for Howard's leadership style. He realized that being a nice guy wasn't enough. He had to be a clear guy. He learned to set boundaries with performers who equated process with stalling. If Shelley Long's friction was a slow-motion intellectual grind, Russell Crowe was a lightning strike. By the time Ron Howard cast Crowe in A Beautiful Mind, the actor was already a legend of the mercurial variety, a man whose physical intensity and hair-trigger temperament were as famous as his Oscar-caliber talent. Howard, the perennial seeker of harmony, was suddenly tasked with directing a performer who believed that great art could only be forged in the heat of a high-pressure furnace. This was not a clash of styles, but a clash of temperaments. The boy next door versus the gladiator. Crowe brought a method intensity to the set that often translated into a desire for total creative control. He didn't just play John Nash, he occupied him, and he expected the production to bend to the needs of that occupation. Howard has recounted that Crowe would ask good, hard questions, which is the director's polite shorthand for intense, multi-hour debates about a single line of dialogue. Crowe also insisted on shooting the film in chronological order, a logistical nightmare for any production. Howard initially resisted, but Crowe was relentless, arguing that the psychological decay of John Nash couldn't be faked by jumping around the timeline. In a rare move, Howard pivoted. He saw that Crowe wasn't being difficult for the sake of ego. He was being difficult for the sake of the truth. This was the turning point in their relationship. Howard learned that with a volatile actor, you don't fight the fire, you channel it. However, the psychological toll on Howard was significant. Unlike his sets with Tom Hanks or Steve Martin, where the atmosphere was one of light-hearted collaboration, the Crowe sets were heavy with the work. There were days of silence, days of heated debate, and days where the air felt thick with Crowe's dissatisfaction. Howard had to develop a new kind of directorial skin, one that could absorb the blows of a leading man's moods without bruising. He learned that some actors don't want a nice director. They want a partner who is as obsessed as they are. By surviving the fire of Russell Crowe, he proved he could handle the most dangerous elements Hollywood had to offer. While Russell Crowe represented the fire of genius, Tom Sizemore represented a far more tragic form of Hollywood friction, the slow-motion collapse of reliability. In the late 90s and early 2000s, Sizemore was one of the industry's most sought-after tough guys, a powerhouse performer who could hold his own against giants like Robert De Niro and Tom Hanks. But by the time he crossed paths with Ron Howard, Sizemore was becoming the poster child for the liability of ice. Sizemore's evil wasn't a malicious intent to harm the film, but rather the total abandonment of the professional contract due to substance abuse. Howard's sets are built on a foundation of Midwestern work ethic. Show up early, know your lines, and respect the crew. Sizemore, caught in the grip of severe addiction, often lived in direct opposition to those values. Unlike a diva who demands more trailers or a perfectionist who demands more takes, An actor struggling with addiction creates a vacuum of anxiety. Every day they are on the call sheet. The director isn't wondering if the scene will be great. They are wondering if the actor will show up at all. For Howard, managing a talent like Sizemore was an exercise in the ethics of the industry. How do you protect a massive production when one of the key moving parts is a human being in the midst of a breakdown? Howard has often spoken about the sadness of witnessing immense talent being eclipsed by personal demons. The friction with Sizemore also highlighted the limits of Howard's nice guy diplomacy. When an actor's personal life begins to endanger the safety or the morale of the set, the director must pivot from being a mentor to being a guardian of the production. Howard had to learn the hard way that you cannot kindness someone out of crisis. Sizemore represented the evil of wasted time, the hundreds of hours lost to delays, and the creative energy siphoned off to manage a crisis. It taught Howard about the fragility of the machine. He saw that even the most expensive, most professional production in the world can be derailed by the chemical imbalance of a single individual. Sizemore remains a ghost in Howard's career, a reminder of what happens when the gilded cage of Hollywood provides too much money and too little accountability. The most complex friction in Ron Howard's career didn't come from an enemy, but from his best friend. On the set of Happy Days, Howard was the undisputed lead, the Richie Cunningham, around whom the 50s nostalgia was built. But within a few seasons, a cultural phenomenon occurred. Henry Winkler's The Fonz didn't just become popular. He became the sun. For Howard, this was the ultimate test of ego. He found himself in a situation where his character remained the moral center, but his status in the industry's eyes was being eroded by a leather-clad supporting player. The friction here was unique because it wasn't personal. Howard and Winkler loved each other. Winkler is the godfather to Howard's children. Yet, the evil was structural. Howard has admitted that the network's treatment of him changed almost overnight. Executives began speaking to him with a disrespect that stung. They floated the idea of changing the show's title to Fonzie's Happy Days, a move so insulting to Howard's professional standing that he threatened to quit. He wasn't jealous of Winkler's success. He was protective of his own dignity. In a recent podcast, Howard confessed to Winkler, "It did hurt my feelings." It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a man who usually keeps his cards close to his chest. This part highlights the most human friction of all, the pain of being eclipsed. Howard's ability to remain friends with Winkler while navigating that professional hurt is perhaps his greatest achievement. It showed that nice guy isn't a weakness. It's a form of extreme emotional intelligence. Howard handled this with a maturity that was beyond his years, a phrase Winkler himself uses to describe the teenage Howard. This friction became the primary catalyst for his transition to directing. If the network didn't respect him as an actor, he would become the one who hired the actors. Howard's journey through the golden and new Hollywood ages wasn't a walk through a garden. It was a navigation of a minefield. From the cold disdain of Frances Bavier to the volcanic genius of Russell Crowe, he encountered every version of the Hollywood shadow. But Howard didn't let the friction burn him. Instead, he used it to polish his own craft. He learned that the evil in Hollywood isn't usually a villain in a black hat. It's the collision of insecure egos, the weight of addiction, and the fickle nature of the marketplace. Today, Howard stands as one of the most successful directors in history, a man who survived the sharp edges of the greats to create a style of his own. He proved that you can face the most difficult archetypes and emerge with your integrity intact. His ledger isn't one of grudges, but of lessons. He is the man who saw the darkness behind the curtain and decided to stay in the light. Subscribe to keep uncovering the truth behind the legends. Thanks for watching.